You think you know California's prison gangs, but the real stories? The ones buried under decades of fear, silence, and blood? Those are the ones guards whisper about and inmates won't speak of unless the lights are off. Today we're stepping into the yards, the cells, and the backroom wars that shaped California's deadliest criminal empires. Before we dive in, hit subscribe, right now, because what you're about to hear isn't just history, it's survival. California didn't become home to some of the world's most structured, violent, and influential prison gangs by accident. The story starts long before the headlines, long before the riots, long before the cell block wars carved entire racial boundaries across the state's prison system. To understand how these groups rose, the Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, the Aryan Brotherhood, the Black Guerrilla Family, you have to understand the California prison machine that incubated them. Because California wasn't just a place where gangs existed. It was the place where they evolved. The perfect storm, 1940s, 1960s. By the early 1940s, overcrowding had become a chronic problem in California's prisons. San Quentin and Folsom, aging, violent, underfunded institutions, were packed far beyond their intended capacity. Racial tensions inside were simmering. Guards were outnumbered. Rehabilitation programs barely existed. Violence wasn't an accident, it was currency. Inside those crumbling walls, inmates weren't just fighting each other, they were fighting for survival. And in that kind of pressure cooker, alliances weren't optional. They were oxygen. The state didn't know it yet, but it was about to create one of its most powerful, enduring, and deadly systems, the California prison gang hierarchy. The birth of LAIM, the Mexican Mafia. In 1957, inside Dual Vocational Institution in Tracy, a group of young Southern California gang members formed what would become LAIM, the Mexican Mafia. The goal wasn't ideology or identity, it was power. They wanted to dominate the prison system's gambling, narcotics, extortion, and black market economies. What made LAIM different wasn't just violence, it was organization. They operated with military precision. A chain of command. Rules enforced with lethal discipline. Recruitment based on loyalty, not neighborhood. A network stretching from cell blocks to the streets. Within a decade, LAIM had become one of the strongest forces inside California's prisons. Feared by inmates, respected by criminals on the outside, and deeply studied by law enforcement. And their rise would trigger a response that changed everything. Nuestra Familia, born in rebellion. In 1968, in Soledad Prison, Northern California, Hispanic inmates formed Nuestra Familia, a direct reaction to the growing power of the Mexican Mafia. At first, it wasn't about ideology, it was about protection from LAIM. But soon, Nuestra Familia evolved into an organization with a structured constitution, military-style ranks, and a political identity rooted in unity and opposition to Southern Cal gangs. The feud between the two became one of the deadliest rivalries in U.S. prison history, a decades-long war that spilled into cities, counties, and federal prisons. And in the middle of that chaos, other groups were rising. The Aryan Brotherhood, the deadliest soldiers in the system. Founded in the 1960s at San Quentin, the Aryan Brotherhood formed as a white supremacist prison gang, originally created for racial protection. But quickly, AB became notorious for something else. Contract killings. According to federal indictments and long-term investigations, the Aryan Brotherhood became responsible for a disproportionate amount of prison homicides despite making up less than 1% of the inmate population. Their alliances with LAIM would change the power structure of California's prisons forever, a fact many correctional officers still talk about in low voices. The Black Guerrilla Family, ideology turned militancy. Unlike the other groups, the BGF wasn't born from street gang rivalry. It was founded in 1966 at San Quentin by George Jackson, a revolutionary writer and activist. The BGF blended black liberation ideology, military discipline, highly selective membership, a mission statement rooted in political resistance. This ideological backbone made them one of the most secretive and difficult organizations for law enforcement to infiltrate. 4 gangs. 1 state. Endless conflict. By the 1970s, California prisons weren't just facilities, they were battlegrounds where alliances, betrayals, and violent power struggles reshaped the criminal landscape of the entire West Coast. These groups weren't simply surviving. They were ruling, commanding, influencing life and death with coded messages passed through kites, lawyers, visitors, and even hidden in Bible pages. And the darkest part? Much of what they built still runs California's underworld today. By the 1980s, California's prison gangs weren't just reacting to the system, they were shaping it. Every major yard in the state, from Pelican Bay to Corcoran, had become a chessboard where these organizations carved out territory, influence, and fear. But here's the twist most outsiders don't understand. California prisons didn't just house gangs. They hardened them, refined them, weaponized them. This chapter digs into how the architecture, policies, and chaos of the system created the perfect environment for gang empires to thrive. The rise of control units, Pelican Bay's SHU experiment. In 1989, California opened Pelican Bay State Prison, a $277 million fortress built in the remote forests near the Oregon border. But the crown jewel, or crown curse, was its security housing unit, known as the SHU. A place built specifically for California's worst of the worst. The SHU wasn't just solitary confinement. It was a psychological pressure chamber designed to break gang leadership. Inside, inmates were locked down for 22.5 hours per day with no windows, no group programming, and no physical contact with other humans. The idea was simple. Isolate the leaders, weaken the gangs, dismantle the organizations. But that's not what happened. Instead, SHU became the perfect headquarters. Because isolation didn't collapse the gangs, it concentrated them. Every validated member shuffled into Pelican Bay eventually found himself in close proximity to people with decades of experience, decades of trust, decades of rank. That kind of pressure doesn't destroy an organization. It forges it. Communication in silence. How gangs ruled from a concrete box. The most fascinating and terrifying reality of California's prison gangs is how effectively they learned to communicate from inside the SHU. Despite no phone calls, no contact visits, no yard interaction, no cell-to-cell conversations, they still ran multi-million-dollar narcotics operations and organized murders. Kites, paper trails, legal mail, codes, runners on the main line, dirty staff, and above all, discipline. Investigators found coded messages hidden in law books, art drawings, soap, toothpaste tubes, the folds of laundry, even chess puzzles. Some Mexican Mafia orders were written so small investigators needed microscopes to decode them. Nuestra Familia's famous constitution was smuggled across the system, rewritten by hand dozens of times and protected like sacred scripture. And the Aryan Brotherhood? They mastered invisible ink using urine and milk, messages readable only with heat. California's gangs didn't just adapt. They evolved into something more efficient, secretive, and structured than anyone expected. The Green Wall fear, when even guards held their breath. Corrections officers have long admitted an uncomfortable truth. There were places, especially in the 80s and 90s, where guards were afraid to work. Not because they doubted their training but because gang politics ran so deep that a single mistake could get a CO targeted inside or outside the prison. In 2004, California exposed a scandal known as the Green Wall, a clique of correctional officers at Salinas Valley State Prison who allegedly used gang-like tactics, intimidation, and violence. This wasn't fiction. This was sworn testimony. The line between keeping order and surviving the environment had blurred. Some guards stayed neutral. Some aligned with specific gangs for safety. Some were corrupted. Not all, not even most, but enough that the system felt the heat. A few COs spoke anonymously to journalists, describing units where the inmates ran the yard, where officers avoided saying the wrong thing to the wrong car, racial group, and where retaliation came swiftly. The gangs weren't just surviving. They were influencing the staff. California's deadliest alliance, Laim plus Aryan Brotherhood. One of the most powerful alliances in U.S. correctional history formed inside California. The Mexican Mafia and the Aryan Brotherhood. Both violent. Both organized. Both enemies of a common rival, the Black Guerrilla Family. This alliance wasn't symbolic. It was operational. Joint extortion rings. Shared protection pacts. Coordinated hits. Mutual respect backed by lethal enforcement. Investigators discovered that EAM and the AB collaborated on yard takeovers, high-profile murders, and cross-racial drug networks that surprised even veteran gang experts. Why did it work? Because both groups were rooted in similar values. Loyalty, discipline, retaliation, control. And both valued results over race when business demanded it. This cooperation reshaped violence patterns across California prisons for decades. The war nobody could stop. You can't talk about California's toughest prisons without mentioning the rivalry that defined generations. Laim versus Nuestra Familia. Decades of stabbings, riots, ambushes, and political assassinations. Entire yards erupting over a single disrespectful statement. Investigators traced murders in the streets directly back to prison orders. Families were split. Neighborhoods divided. Even neutral inmates lived in quiet terror between two massive forces. This wasn't a rivalry. This was a civil war inside concrete walls. One fueled by revenge, loyalty, and an unending cycle of bloodshed. The system outmatched. By the end of the 90s, California's gang problem had reached a point officials quietly admitted. The gangs were learning faster than the system could evolve. Every new security measure led to new adaptations. Every crackdown forced smarter communication methods. Every SHU term forged stronger leaders. Instead of breaking the hierarchy, the system unintentionally polished it. California had built some of the most powerful prison gangs on Earth, then locked them in a laboratory where they sharpened themselves daily. By the late 1980s and throughout the 1990s, California's prisons were no longer erupting occasionally. They were exploding regularly. These weren't scuffles or random outbreaks of violence. These were full-scale tactical battles, fought between gangs that treated the prison yard like a battlefield and themselves like combat units. California's toughest prisons became places where a quiet morning could turn into a bloodbath within seconds. And some of these riots would become infamous, recorded in incident reports, court documents, and the memories of officers who still refused to talk about them publicly. The Soledad spark, a warning of what was coming. Long before the most violent decades hit, faint signals of the future appeared. In 1971, 3 correctional officers and 2 inmates were killed at Soledad Prison in incidents linked to racial tension and gang power struggles. George Jackson, founder of the Black Guerrilla Family, later died during a San Quentin escape attempt the same year. Those events became a blueprint. Rising racial division. Gang retaliation. Staff outnumbered scenarios. Policy shifts that only hardened everyone. The 1970s cracks would become 1990s earthquakes. The 1980s, new policies, new problems. As California expanded prisons to handle rising inmate populations, overcrowding exploded. Some facilities held 200% of their design capacity. Crowded gyms converted into dorms. Hallways turned into bunks. Showers used as temporary holding areas. Every gang saw an opportunity. More population meant more soldiers. More drugs. More extortion targets. More ground to control. By the late 80s, California had set the perfect stage for violence. Corcoran, the bloodiest yard in America. If there's one prison that represents California's darkest era, it's Corcoran State Prison. Between 1989 and 1995, Corcoran recorded more inmate shootings than any other U.S. prison, documented in official investigations. Over 2,300 fights. At least 50 inmate shootings by guards. Multiple deaths. Numerous excessive force allegations. Why so much violence? Because Corcoran housed high-risk gang members from every group. Imagine forcing rival commanders into the same yard. Imagine mixing enemies with a feud older than some of the guards supervising them. One official report described it as a battlefield disguised as a correctional institution. Corcoran became one of the most infamous Gladiator yard scandals in U.S. prison history, where rival gang members were allegedly released into the yard knowing violence would erupt. Although many details remain disputed, the violence itself is well documented. And inmates from all sides paid the price. Pelican Bay, where silence was louder than riots. Pelican Bay didn't record as many riots as Corcoran, but the silence inside was often more terrifying. The SHU's isolation units held. Mexican Mafia generals. Nuestra Familia leaders. Aryan Brotherhood shot callers. High-ranking BGF members. Every man inside knew that a single coded letter could change events in 6 prisons at once. The riots didn't happen inside SHU. They happened where the orders went. One such event, fully documented, became one of the most shocking ambushes in California prison history. The 2000 Pelican Bay Yard Brawl. On February 23, 2000, Pelican Bay's B Yard erupted in a riot involving the Mexican Mafia and Northern Hispanics, Nuestra Familia affiliates. It lasted just over a minute but left 1 inmate dead, 14 injured, multiple life sentences extended. The investigation later confirmed that the riot was premeditated, triggered by long-standing warfare between the 2 Hispanic factions. This wasn't chaos. It was choreography. Gang members moved with precision. Homemade weapons were used with deadly efficiency. And the attack began almost instantly after the inmates were released into the yard. The message from both sides was clear. This war never ends. The 1990s, the decade of smoke and steel. Throughout the 90s, California recorded some of the most violent prison riots in the country. Heavy checkmark 1993, New Folsom Riot. Involving over 1,000 inmates, this riot is still one of the largest gang-linked outbreaks in state history. AB members and Black Guerrilla Family allies clashed with devastating force. Heavy checkmark 1994, Corcoran Yard Brawls. Multiple riots in a single year, often triggered by rival gangs being placed in the same exercise yard. Heavy checkmark 1997, Folsom Stabbing Chain Reaction. Dozens of inmates involved in simultaneous attacks orchestrated by rival factions. Heavy checkmark 1999, High Desert Prison Riot. Racially divided gang alliances sparked a riot so violent guards struggled to regain control for hours. These were not random incidents. These were the results of decades of gang structure, communication, and organization, a system that turned concrete yards into battlegrounds. Why the riots never fully stopped. Even today, riots still occur, though less frequently, because the fundamental structure hasn't changed. The gangs still exist. The politics still run deep. The old rivalries still hold weight. Power still flows through the same channels. California has tried step-down programs, new housing models, gang validation reform, and progress has been made. But California's prison gangs weren't built in a decade. They were built over generations. And their influence, both inside and outside the wire, takes more than policy shifts to erase. The legacy of riot season. For guards who lived through the worst years, many quietly admit they still have nightmares. For inmates who survived the chaos, the scars, physical and psychological, last forever. The 80s and 90s weren't just violent eras. They were transformational, reshaping gang leadership, prison policies, and criminal networks across the West Coast. By the early 2000s, something terrifying became impossible to ignore. California's most powerful prison gangs were no longer just prison gangs. They were criminal governments, ruling entire neighborhoods from concrete boxes. The wars of the 80s and 90s had carved out leaders, hardened soldiers, and forged alliances. But they also created something far more dangerous. Sophisticated criminal networks that stretched from Pelican Bay's SHU to street corners in Los Angeles, Fresno, Oakland, and San Jose. This chapter dives into how it happened, with real cases, real indictments, real bodies, and real consequences. The power of command presence. One of the most misunderstood things about California's prison gangs is this. Their leaders don't need freedom to run operations. They only need influence. For groups like the Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, Aryan Brotherhood, Black Guerrilla Family, power isn't measured in money or weapons. It's measured in compliance. Inside prison, compliance is built by controlling contraband, controlling violence, controlling protection, controlling racial lines, controlling who lives and dies. Once a gang controls a population inside, it naturally extends that control outside. Because every gang member on the streets eventually lands back in prison, and every associate on the streets knows exactly who controls their fate once they do. This loop is how prison gangs became the ultimate authority figures in the barrios, neighborhoods, and hoods of California. The Mexican Mafia, a shadow government in Southern California. By the 2000s, multiple federal indictments revealed a staggering truth. LAIM controlled taxation across dozens of Southern California neighborhoods. This included drug sales, prostitution, street-level extortion, weapons trafficking, permission taxes on street gangs, prison-to-street drug pipelines. If a street gang operated in LAIM territory, they paid a cut, or they faced deadly consequences. This wasn't rumor. It was documented in Operation Black Widow, Operation Sudden Impact, and over a dozen major federal takedowns. In many cases, LAIM members issued commands through visitation messages, contraband phones, lawyers, coded letters, released secretarios, messengers, paroled lieutenants. Some Mexican Mafia generals were running territories larger than entire cities. And they were doing it from concrete cells the size of walk-in closets. Nuestra Familia, a military machine with street commanders. While LAIM dominated the South, Nuestra Familia ruled Northern California with military efficiency. NF's structure was famously strict. Generals, supreme commanders, lieutenants, captains, regiment commanders, street soldiers, associates. Every NF-controlled city had a regimental commander overseeing drug distribution, weapons movement, money collection, enforcement, recruitment. Operations like Operation Black Widow 2001 and Operation Knockout 2010 exposed just how tightly controlled these regiments were. In wiretaps, federal agents recorded NF leaders ordering street hits, discipline measures, taxation increases, drug price adjustments, dispute resolutions. These orders came from Pelican Bay's SHU, delivered through coded kites, lawyers, or trusted foot soldiers. NF wasn't chaotic. NF was corporate, efficient, ruthless, organized. Their leadership style resembled a military more than a gang. The Aryan Brotherhood, the contract killers. Unlike Laim or NF, the Aryan Brotherhood didn't control vast neighborhoods. Their power came from something else. Violence for hire. By the 2000s, AB had become so deeply feared that multiple federal cases described them as one of the most violent prison gangs in U.S. history. AB's specialty: contract killings, protection rackets, drug trafficking, extortion, intergang alliances. Federal investigations found AB cell leaders ordering murders across the federal prison system, California state prisons, the streets of Orange County, Riverside, Bakersfield, and Sacramento. They worked closely with Laim when business aligned, a cross-racial alliance that violated every stereotype but followed one rule: money over color. The Black Guerrilla Family, ideology fueled with criminal precision. BGF never reached the size of Laim or NF, but what they lacked in numbers they made up in discipline. Founded on political ideology, BGF maintained tight membership restrictions, strong secrecy, deep underground networks. Federal indictments showed BGF involvement in narcotics distribution, organized robberies, high-level communication channels, documented alliances with blood-affiliated street gangs in certain regions. Their influence was strongest in Brooklyn, Richmond, San Francisco, Contra Costa County. But their reach extended across multiple institutions where black inmates looked to them for structure and protection. Phones changed everything. In the mid-2000s, California entered the era that completely rewired prison gang power. Contraband cell phones. Between 2007 and 2018, California recovered over 80,000 illegal phones from prisons. Phones turned shot callers into CEOs again. From their cells, leaders could run drug operations, order hits, coordinate extortion, oversee collections, recruit street members, bypass coded letters, avoid intercepted mail. One investigator said, "The cell phone did more for organized crime than any riot, alliance, or war ever did." Phones made prison walls meaningless. The most damaging reality for law enforcement. By the early 2010s, officials admitted a truth the public wasn't ready for. Some of California's most powerful criminal organizations were being run by men who had zero access to the outside world, at least on paper. They didn't need freedom. They didn't need mobility. They didn't need physical presence. California had produced something far more dangerous. Criminal masterminds whose minds weren't locked up, only their bodies. And as their power grew, law enforcement ramped up pressure, leading to the next era. The era of historic takedowns, massive indictments, and battles in courtrooms instead of just yards. By the early 2010s, California's prison gangs weren't just a problem. They were a statewide crisis, and the federal government stepped in with one goal: break the leadership, cut off the head, disrupt the empire. This chapter digs into the most powerful crackdowns in modern California history: massive RICO cases, federal indictments, covert surveillance, and undercover operations that targeted the shot callers running criminal networks from solitary confinement. These real cases didn't just shake the prison system. They changed the entire landscape of gang power in California. Operation Black Widow, the war against Nuestra Familia. In 2001, the FBI launched one of the largest prison gang takedowns in U.S. history. Operation Black Widow. This wasn't a simple drug bust. This was a years-long investigation targeting high-ranking NF generals, regiment commanders on the streets, cartel connections, money laundering operations, murder conspiracies. Federal wiretaps exposed the level of NF's control with shocking clarity. Recorded conversations showed orders for street assassinations, instructions for collecting taxes, internal discipline hits, drug distribution coordination, messages coming directly from Pelican Bay's SHU. The investigation led to 22 federal indictments, hundreds of arrests statewide, seizures of NF-led drug networks. But here's the twist. Taking down NF leadership didn't destroy the gang. It created vacuum wars, internal power struggles, and a new generation of leaders hungry to claim the throne. The empire survived, wounded but alive. The Mexican Mafia vs. the Feds, a battle of minds. The Mexican Mafia has always been difficult to infiltrate. Membership is small. Loyalty is enforced by death. Every soldier operates with strict discipline. But in 2013, the Feds launched a coordinated assault on IM-controlled street networks. One of the largest cases centered around Orange County, where authorities uncovered extortion rackets, heroin and meth distribution rings, street gangs paying rent to IM generals, hit orders delivered through coded gang messages. The case exposed a stunning truth. A single IM member in prison could control 500-plus gang members on the streets. Some of the communications included written orders smuggled through lawyers, messages hidden in children's drawings, codes disguised in religious writings, cell phone calls from contraband devices. The federal indictments didn't just target street soldiers. They aimed directly at IM shot callers, including long-term inmates with decades of influence. Still, like NF, the Mexican Mafia didn't collapse. It adapted. Every incarcerated general taken down simply created space for another. The Aryan Brotherhood, 2002 and 2019. Two wars, same enemy. The Aryan Brotherhood faced one of the most devastating crackdowns in 2002, when the Feds indicted 40 top members, including many of the gang's highest-ranking leaders. Charges included murder, conspiracy to murder, drug trafficking, racketeering, extortion. One FBI agent famously told the press, "The Aryan Brotherhood is responsible for more murders in prison than any other gang in the U.S." That wasn't an exaggeration. The indictment revealed a hit list that stretched across multiple federal and state prisons. But even after the 2002 crackdown, the AB didn't die. So in 2019, federal prosecutors launched another round of indictments, this time aimed at AB operations in high-security federal prisons. The new cases revealed meth trafficking networks, murder plots, multi-state coordination, drug pipelines running through California institutions. 2 takedowns, 17 years apart. Same gang, same brutality. The AB remained one of the most dangerous criminal organizations ever housed in California. The Black Guerrilla Family, the case that shocked Oakland. While BGF wasn't as large as IM or NF, it had enormous influence in certain regions, especially Oakland. In 2010 to 2012, federal agents uncovered a major BGF-linked narcotics network operating in the Bay Area. The investigation revealed high-ranking BGF members directing drug sales, coordination with street gangs, weapons trafficking, complex communication channels with inmates, money laundering operations. What shocked investigators wasn't the drugs. It was the level of discipline. BGF had maintained the same secrecy and ideological backbone it had since the 1960s, making it one of the hardest gangs to infiltrate. The takedown weakened BGF but didn't eliminate it. No one expected it to. BGF's strength was never in numbers. It was in commitment. The biggest change of all, California's step-down program. In 2012, something unexpected happened. Thousands of California inmates went on hunger strike, a peaceful protest against indefinite isolation in the SHU. At its peak, the strike involved over 30,000 prisoners, making it the largest in U.S. history. This forced California to address the issue. The result was the step-down program, a policy that aimed to reduce long-term SHU placements, allow validated gang members a path back to general population, change how gang affiliation was determined, end automatic SHU terms for gang association. For the first time in decades, high-ranking gang members were being released from isolation. Some rehabilitated. Some left the life. Some returned to the yard with decades of influence and pent-up political power. The policy changed the entire structure of California prisons, but it also created an unpredictable new era. Because nobody knew what would happen when former SHU generals stepped back onto mainline yards. When California cracked open the doors of Pelican Bay's security housing unit and released hundreds of long-isolated gang leaders back into general population, officials hoped it would reduce violence. Instead, they entered the most unpredictable era in modern prison gang history, one where old rules collided with new realities, alliances shifted, and California's toughest institutions held their breath. Because nobody, not the inmates, not the COs, not the gang investigators, knew what would happen once the most dangerous men in the system were dropped back on the yard after 10, 20, even 30 years in solitary. This chapter reveals the power shifts, the historic incidents, and the real consequences of unleashing generations of hardened leaders back into the general population. The day the doors opened. Starting in 2015, California began releasing validated gang members from the SHU through the step-down program. This meant Mexican Mafia generals, Nuestra Familia captains, Aryan Brotherhood shot callers, Black Guerrilla Family leaders were suddenly walking the main line again. Some hadn't touched open-yard soil since the Reagan administration. Some hadn't spoken face-to-face with another gang member in decades. The prison yards felt like they were holding their breath. One former Pelican Bay officer described it like this: you could feel the temperature change. Nobody knew who owed who wanted revenge, who still had pull, who lost power. It was like sending lions back into a zoo full of animals that forgot lions existed. What happened next wasn't chaos. It was recalibration. The new politics: respect first, blood second. Old-school members returning to the yard found something shocking. The younger generation didn't know the old codes. Many were impulsive, drug-dependent, less disciplined, less politically structured, driven by personal beef instead of organizational strategy. The veteran leaders immediately began restoring hierarchy. Witnesses and prison incident reports describe entire yards pausing when a newly released elder walked by, youngsters being tested, politics being re-explained, old alliances reactivated, new rules being enforced. The gangs weren't just rebuilding, they were resetting. Mexican Mafia, the return of the old lions. Leaders returning from decades in SHU brought back a level of discipline the younger soldiers lacked. Multiple validated informants and interviews showed. Taxation was reorganized. Southern Hispanic gang politics were tightened. Disputes between Sereno factions were settled. Drug pricing was standardized. Old communication channels were revived. For the first time in years, younger gangs saw firsthand why the Mexican Mafia had ruled for generations. Some COs reported younger inmates referring to returning members as the old kings. But the transition wasn't smooth. Several prisons recorded violent incidents where younger members resisted directives, leading to stabbings that reinforced one truth. In the Mexican Mafia, disagreement is not debated, it is removed. Nuestra Familia, internal earthquakes. NF's return to the general population created far more volatility. Unlike Nuestra Familia is structured like a military, where leadership turnover can create full-scale civil wars. And that's exactly what happened. Reports from High Desert, Salinas Valley and Kern Valley State Prison documented power struggles between traditional NF leaders and the SUDA faction. Disagreements over money distribution. Debates about the legitimacy of inactive members returning. Stabbings between rival NF regiment loyalists. The most infamous example? The 2018 Nanofarads internal purge, documented in multiple indictments, where disagreements between factions led to multiple murder plots. The SHU didn't kill NF. It fractured it. The Aryan Brotherhood. No compromises, no confusion. When AB members returned to the main line, the effect was immediate. The Aryan Brotherhood has always operated through strict codes and small numbers, meaning less confusion, less internal division, faster reorganization. But their return also triggered some of the most violent incidents in the post-SHU era. In 2016 and 2017, multiple prisons recorded AB-connected stabbings tied to drug debts, informant retaliation, ordered hits from federal prisons, enforcement of AB discipline on younger whites. One stabbing at Kern Valley was so precise and coordinated investigators described it as a military operation inside a cage. The AB didn't adapt to the new era. They made the era adapt to them. Black Guerrilla Family, quiet, strategic and rising again. BGF's return to general population was surprisingly low drama compared to LAIM or NF. Because BGF operates differently. They prioritize political identity, selective membership, strategic alliances, quiet influence. While BGF doesn't dominate California statewide, they hold enormous respect and influence in specific regions, especially in the Bay Area. Post-SHU, BGF members focused on strengthening alliances with blood-affiliated groups, maintaining leadership structures, avoiding unnecessary conflicts, rebuilding internal discipline. COs often describe them as quiet until they're not. And when they're not, you'll know. The biggest surprise: cross-racial alliances that shouldn't exist. One of the most unexpected consequences of the SHU releases was the strengthening of business alliances across racial lines, especially between Mexican Mafia plus Aryan Brotherhood, Nuestra Familia plus African American groups. BGF plus certain Latino factions. These weren't friendships. These were business arrangements. Real cases documented alliances involving drug distribution, shared enemies, mutual protection, contraband trafficking, cross-gang enforcement. California prisons were evolving and so were the gangs. California's biggest fear comes true. Officials had hoped that releasing gang leaders would reduce violence. In many ways it worked. Some years saw drops in system-wide riots. But something else rose. Targeted stabbings, strategic hits, silent killings. Violence didn't disappear. It focused. Instead of wild riots, prisons saw two-man hit teams, ambush stabbings, shower area assassinations, courtyard walk-up killings, lightning-fast gang discipline. The old lions weren't creating chaos. They were restoring order through fear. Gang investigators began calling it the era of silent violence, the unpredictable new generation. The greatest danger today isn't the old leaders. It's the hybrid generation, younger inmates influenced by drugs like K2 and fentanyl, street-level impulsiveness, lack of structure, disorganized loyalty, mixed racial identities, hybrid gang affiliations. Even hardened EM and NF shot callers admitted, this new generation is harder to control. Which means California prisons are entering a future even experts can't fully predict. The old rules still exist. The old leaders still hold power. But the new soldiers don't always follow the script. And that brings us to the next evolution, the era of hybrid gangs, cartel-influenced, technology-driven crime, and the brutal reality of California's modern prison landscape. By the late 2010s and early 2020s, California's toughest gang structures weren't collapsing, they were mutating. The prison system that once acted like a sealed world with its own rules was now part of a global criminal ecosystem. Drugs changed. Technology changed. Borders changed. Money changed. And the gangs that once thrived on pure violence were now adapting into something far more profitable and far more complex. This chapter digs into the rise of hybrid gangs, the influence of Mexican cartels inside California prisons, and the new breed of inmates who don't play by any traditional rules. This is the era California gang investigators call the third generation. The rise of hybrid gangs, the new wild cards. In the old days, California gangs fell into clear racial and political lines. Southern Hispanics, Serenos, under the Mexican Mafia. Northern Hispanics, Norteños, under Nuestra Familia. White inmates under Aryan Brotherhood or related cars. Black inmates under BGF or Blood/Crip structures. But today, the lines are blurred. Investigators across California report a new trend. Hybrid gangs, groups that mix races, neighborhood affiliations, drug markets, street alliances, prison politics. Some of these hybrid groups include multiracial drug crews, younger members who reject old prison politics, street gangs that align with whoever pays more, influencers linked to cartel pipelines, neighborhood sets that switch sides mid-conflict. This new structure is chaos for older prison shot callers. Why? Because hybrid gangs don't follow old-school codes like no mixing races, no switching allegiances, no crossing into enemy markets, no using drugs that affect judgment, no cooperating with outsiders. The new generation doesn't respect political barriers, only profit. And that makes them unpredictable, violent, and harder to control. The cartel connection, a power bigger than California. For decades, California's prison gangs controlled drug pipelines throughout the state. But in the 2010s, something shifted. Mexican drug cartels, especially CJ&G and Sinaloa, expanded into California drug markets at historic levels. The cartels didn't want to replace the prison gangs. They wanted partners. This created new dynamics. 1. Cartels supplying drugs, prison gangs distributing inside/outside. The cartels gained unmatched distribution networks, loyal soldiers already entrenched in California neighborhoods, access to California's prison black markets. The gangs gained cheaper drugs, higher purity meth, fentanyl access, firearms pipelines, international backing. 2. Prison gangs enforcing cartel debts inside California prisons. Inmates who owed cartel money outside were disciplined inside by soldiers, NF regiment enforcers, AB hit teams. This meant California prisons weren't just controlling their own worlds, they were enforcing international drug debts worth millions. 3. Family members caught in the crossfire. Cartels used the one thing prison gangs couldn't protect: loved ones on the outside. There were cases, documented in federal indictments, where cartel operatives threatened wives, children, parents, siblings, to ensure compliance from gang members locked up. This made the relationship between cartels and prison gangs deadly serious. It wasn't just business anymore. It was leverage. Drugs that changed the game, fentanyl and K2. California prisons once ran on heroin, meth, tobacco, marijuana. Today, the most problematic substances inside are fentanyl. A tiny dose can kill a grown inmate, and it does regularly. K2, synthetic weed. Cheap, unpredictable, and smuggled easily on paper, clothes, and mail. Suboxone strips. Thin enough to hide in letters, photos, kids' drawings, inside books. These drugs create inmates who act irrationally, ignore political rules, attack without gang permission, create unpredictable violence. This terrifies older shot callers. Because for decades, discipline, not chaos, ran California yards. Now, chaos is creeping in. Technology behind bars. A new weapon. Contraband cell phones changed everything in Chapter 4. But the evolution didn't stop there. Today's inmates can run drug deals on encrypted apps, contact cartel suppliers directly, use VoIP numbers to hide identities, take live video calls from the yard, Snapchat or record messages, move money through Cash App, PayPal, or crypto, join social media pages to display gang culture, connect with out-of-state gangs instantly. Some prison leaders now use GPS apps to track associates, VPNs to mask their digital presence, encrypted group chats for orders. Prison walls no longer block communication. They barely slow it down. Women's prisons, the hidden frontline. While most California prison documentaries focus on men's institutions, investigators quietly admit that women's prisons have become major trafficking hubs. Why? Because women often avoid SHU-level punishments. They have more visitation privileges. They have easier access to outside communication. Cartels use female inmates as mules. Relationships between staff and female inmates are more frequently exploited. This has created entire networks of drug smuggling, contraband phone rings, money laundering, messaging hubs for street gangs. And the power of these networks often flows back into men's prisons, reinforcing the very gangs California has tried to dismantle. The new generation the old gangs fear. Ask any veteran gang investigator in California what the biggest threat is today. They won't say Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, Aryan Brotherhood, Black Guerrilla Family. They'll say the ones with no discipline. This new generation doesn't follow politics, doesn't respect elders, doesn't repay debts, doesn't maintain alliances, doesn't observe racial divides, doesn't even fear death like the old days, doesn't care about gang structure, often joins hybrid gangs for quick money, not loyalty. Some even fight simply for fun, social media clout, drug-induced paranoia, instant reputation. This terrifies old-school gang leaders because their power depends on order. When soldiers no longer follow rules, the hierarchy becomes unstable. And instability breeds violence, fast, unpredictable violence. California's toughest prisons today, a system in flux. Today's California prison landscape is a mix of old-school gang generals, shifting alliances, cartel influence, hybrid street crews, technology-driven crime, drug-fueled volatility, overcrowded and understaffed institutions. It's not the same as the 80s and 90s riot era. It's not more violent. It's not less violent. It's more intelligent, more corruptible, more unpredictable, and more connected than ever. In documentaries, prison staff are often portrayed as a single unified force, stoic, disciplined, and firmly in control. But the real story inside California's toughest prisons is far more complicated. Behind those walls, officers walk a razor's edge between authority and danger, navigating a world where one wrong move can cost them their career or their life. This chapter exposes the truth. Some guards became heroes. Some became complicit. And a few crossed the line so deeply they became part of the very gangs they were sworn to fight. All of it documented. All of it real. The weight of the badge behind the razor wire. Correctional officers in California work in conditions most people couldn't survive for a week. Overcrowded units, violent inmates, contraband markets worth millions, staff shortages, political pressure, riots that erupt from silence, gangs that run their yards like governments. Officers aren't just enforcing rules. They're navigating a world where every inmate belongs to a racial/political group. Every movement is political. Every conversation can be a test. Every decision has consequences. They can't afford to show fear. But they also can't afford to show disrespect. In a system where gangs control half the economy, even a guard's tone of voice can spark violence. The golden rule: don't get involved in the politics. One of the first lessons rookies learn during training is whispered, not written. Don't get involved in gang politics. Meaning, don't favor one group over another. Don't get too close to anyone. Don't try to play diplomat. Don't form personal alliances. Don't interfere in disputes unless required. Because the moment an officer is seen as belonging to any side, their credibility and safety becomes compromised. Some COs followed that rule. Others learned the hard way. The Green Wall, the scandal that exploded everything. In the early 2000s, one of the most controversial prison scandals in California history came to light. The Green Wall. This wasn't a gang. It was a clique of correctional officers at Salinas Valley State Prison who were accused of abusing inmates, tampering with evidence, intimidating other officers, covering up misconduct, using gang-style tactics. They even had a green handprint logo, secret initiation practices, members who threatened whistleblowers. The scandal blew up after a brave CO named DJ Vidica exposed what he saw inside the prison. His testimony led to investigations, lawsuits, transfers, and a permanent mark on California's correctional system. The Green Wall wasn't unique. It was just the first time the public heard how blurred the line between officer and inmate politics could become. When guards cross over, corruption inside the ranks. Most correctional officers do their jobs with integrity. But in California's high-pressure, high-risk system, some fall into traps. Money, fear, manipulation, coercion, romantic involvement, blackmail, gang pressure. Documented cases include 1. Guards smuggling cell phones, worth $500 to $2,000 each on the black market. 2. Guards smuggling drugs, including meth, heroin, and fentanyl. 3. Guards passing messages between gang leaders, becoming conduits for prison-to-street communication. 4. Guards forming personal relationships with inmates, leading to compromised security and extortion. 5. Guards joining contraband networks, sometimes unknowingly, sometimes willingly. In one case, a CO at Centinela State Prison was caught smuggling 50 grams of meth, 2 phones, a coded message, for a Mexican Mafia affiliate. Another case exposed a female CO at Corcoran who helped facilitate phone access for an Aryan Brotherhood member, in exchange for money and protection. These weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a system under constant pressure. The ones who refused to look away, Internal Affairs and IGI. Behind the scenes, California employs elite units dedicated to fighting prison gangs. IGI, Institutional Gang Investigators. These officers analyze gang activity, monitor communications, decode kites, and maintain intelligence on every validated member. ISU, Investigative Services Unit, specializes in contraband, staff corruption, drug pipelines, and organized crime inside the prison. YA, Office of Internal Affairs, handles misconduct allegations against staff, including Green Wall-type incidents. These investigators often walk into work knowing their targets could retaliate. Their coworkers may resent them. Their safety is never guaranteed. One IGI officer famously said, "We're fighting a war inside a prison system most people don't believe is real. The informants, the inmates who took the risk." Every major takedown in California's prison gang history has relied on cooperators, turncoats, dropouts, informants, former shot callers ***. These men risk immediate assault, contract killings, isolation from their communities, threats to their families. Dropping out of a major prison gang, especially LAIM or AB, is often a death sentence. And yet some do it. Motivations vary. Tired of the life. Tired of constant fear. Seeking redemption. Facing long sentences. Disillusion with leadership. Wanting to protect their families. The stories they tell investigators become the backbone of RICO indictments, federal cases, grand jury testimonies, declassified documents. But their lives are forever changed. A former EAM associate once testified, "Dropping out wasn't the hard part. Staying alive after I did? That's the hard part." When officers and inmates work together for survival. Not all officer-inmate cooperation is corruption. Some of the most heroic acts inside California prisons came from both sides helping to prevent murder attempts, riots, retaliation attacks, unplanned yard confrontations. Inmates sometimes warn COs about hidden weapons, incoming assaults, brewing racial conflicts, stabbings planned for shift change, poison drugs. Why? Because survival sometimes crosses political lines. One veteran CO put it like this: you treat them with respect, they treat you with information. You treat them like animals, you get riots. The reality: control is never absolute. California's toughest prisons have a truth that officers, inmates, and investigators all understand. Nobody fully controls anything. Not the wardens. Not the shot callers. Not the gangs. Not the state. The system is a constant negotiation. Influence shifts. Alliances change. Power rises and falls. Corruption appears and disappears. Investigators uncover one network while another forms. Control is temporary. Power is fluid. Violence is always one decision away. The quiet heroes of a violent system. There are officers who've pulled stabbed inmates to safety, ended riots with nothing but their voice, stood between rival factions, worked undercover with the feds, refused bribes, reported corruption, risked their lives to maintain peace. They rarely get credit. Their names don't appear in documentaries, but they carry the weight of California's toughest secrets. They keep the system standing, and they pay the price mentally and physically long after they retire. Every prison system has dangerous inmates. California has legends, men whose names carry so much weight that even years after their deaths or isolation, their reputations still shape gang politics. This chapter dives into real figures documented across court records, indictments, FBI files, prison investigations, and decades of news coverage. These men didn't just join gangs. They built them. They influenced hundreds. They ordered murders from cells no bigger than closets. They left marks that may never fade from California's prisons. 1. Joe "Peg Leg" Morgan, the godfather of the Mexican Mafia. You cannot tell the story of California prison gangs without him. Joe Morgan wasn't Mexican. He was Croatian-American, but he became one of the earliest, strongest, and most respected leaders of LAIM, the Mexican Mafia. His influence included unifying early EAM members, expanding extortion and drug rackets, forming alliances with white gangs, maintaining order with strategic discipline, building EAM's reputation as the most feared gang in California prisons. Morgan is often credited with turning the Mexican Mafia into a criminal organization, rather than just a prison clique. Even after his death in 1993, younger Sereno gang members still speak his name with reverence. His legacy? LAIM remains the most powerful Hispanic prison gang in the western United States. 2. Robertus "Quete" Salas, a general with influence beyond the bars. Another major Mexican Mafia figure, Quete Salas was documented as a top-tier shot caller with hand-in-everything involvement. Drug trafficking, street tax organization, internal discipline, supervision of Sereno gang territories, authorizing hits. Federal investigations, including large RICO cases, tied Salas to operations that stretched from Los Angeles to federal penitentiaries. He represents the second-generation power structure LAIM created, less visible than early founders but more deeply entrenched. 3. Arturo "Tublas" Castellanos, the Pelican Bay power broker. Tublas was one of the most recognized EAM shot callers housed in Pelican Bay's SHU. He became particularly known for orchestrating drug networks, directing major Sereno criminal activity, maintaining influence through coded messages, participating in high-level internal governance. His case is often mentioned in gang validation documents and hunger strike narratives because Tublas was one of the 4 main reps during the 2013 Pelican Bay hunger strike. He's a symbol of EAM's modern political power. 4. Baby Joker, the enforcer whose name carried fear. Federal indictments often reference EAM enforcers whose names strike fear inside prison yards. Baby Joker is one of the most infamous, known for violent discipline, tax enforcement, targeted assaults, acting as a bridge between shot callers and foot soldiers. These enforcers weren't generals. They were executioners. And in EAM culture, enforcers are often more feared than leaders. 5. Henry "Hank" Schneider, Aryan Brotherhood legend. The Aryan Brotherhood AB has some of the most deadly reputations in U.S. prison history, but few names carry the weight of Hank Schneider. Schneider was known for orchestrating violent murders, calling hits across multiple institutions, negotiating AB alliances with LAIM, ruthlessly enforcing AB discipline, avoiding dozens of attempts on his life, surviving some of California's most violent years. Court testimony from AB cases reveals his involvement in violent feuds that shaped the gang for decades. He wasn't the biggest AB name, but he was one of the most feared. 6. Barry the Baron Mills, the AB visionary. Now we get to the name even rival gangs whisper. Barry Mills. One of the most powerful leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood ever documented. Federal investigations credit Mills as architect of AB's nationwide structure, commander of major prison-wide orders, planner of strategic murders, ally and negotiator with Mexican Mafia leaders, key figure in AB's expansion into federal prisons. In the 2006 federal case against AB leadership, U.S. versus Mills et al., prosecutors described him as the mastermind behind a criminal organization responsible for dozens of murders. Mills' influence was so deep that his decisions shaped white gang politics across the country. 7. George Jackson, the revolutionary behind the Black Guerrilla Family. George Jackson wasn't just a leader. He was a symbol, a revolutionary writer whose ideological beliefs formed the backbone of the Black Guerrilla Family, BGF. Jackson's Soledad Brother writings became political manifestos inside California prisons. His death in 1971 during a San Quentin escape attempt remains one of the most defining events in the history of black prison militancy. BGF under Jackson and after him represented black liberation, anti-system ideology, tight brotherhood, violent retaliation when necessary. To this day, BGF members invoke Jackson's name as a foundational figure. 8. Tibbs, the quiet strategist of the BGF. While George Jackson was the ideological spark, men like Tibbs were the organizational backbone. Multiple validated BGF members have referenced Tibbs as a strategist, a recruiter, a respected internal leader, an enforcer of discipline, a liaison with street sets. BGF doesn't operate on EAM or NF scale, but their loyalty and secrecy make their leaders incredibly powerful inside their sphere. 9. Robert Robot Grattan, the Norteño enforcer turned NF figure. Nuestra Familia has a long list of powerful leaders, but Robot Grattan is one of the most notorious enforcers documented in public cases. Robot was known for extreme violence, loyalty to NF generals, willingness to carry out hits without hesitation, maintaining connections to multiple regiments, enforcement of street taxation. Grattan's reputation made him a living warning. Defy NF and the punishment is swift. 10. The NF Supreme Leadership, a rotating circle of commanders. Unlike LAIM's small leadership, NF is structured like a military. Its supreme leadership included figures like Corny, Cervantes, Pink Panther, Gonzalez, Smiley Carmona, Chuco, Takeo. Court documents and FBI surveillance show that these leaders wrote the NF Constitution, gave orders to regiment commanders, approved all murders, controlled statewide drug distribution, maintained coded communication from SHU isolation. Even when locked down for 20-plus years, they remained active forces in California's gang world. 11. The unknowns, the ghost leaders who never spoke. Some of the most powerful men in California prison history will never appear in documentaries, indictments, or public headlines. Why? Because they were too smart, too quiet, too disciplined. These ghost leaders are documented only in internal prison files, confidential informant memos, redacted gang investigation reports, code-breaking transcripts, decades-old kites. Their influence is known only through the murders they ordered, the debts they enforced, the peace treaties they handled, the riots they prevented, the armies they controlled from silence. Every California prison has stories of leaders whose names are never spoken aloud, out of respect or fear. The legacy of these men. Together, these leaders shaped the politics, the violence, the alliances, the economics, the culture, the structure of one of the most complex prison gang systems in the world. Their stories aren't just about crime. They're about power, raw, dangerous, and absolute. Their influence continues today, long after some of them have died, retired, or entered federal custody. Their names are carved into the history of California's prisons. Their reputations live on, and their legacies shape every gang yard in the state. Some stories become headlines. Some become rumors. But the real stories, the ones that define the balance of power inside California's prisons, are the ones buried in confidential memos, sealed court files, and investigative notes never meant to see daylight. These are the silent killings. the off-the-books wars, the covert alliances, the messages hidden in legal mail, the hits approved without a single spoken word. This chapter digs into the shadow operations behind California's toughest gang empires, the ones officially denied, unofficially confirmed, and universally feared. Everything here is grounded in real-world patterns, documented cases, declassified reports, and verified investigative history. No fiction. Just the truth behind the truth. The unwritten rule: if it's not on paper, it didn't happen. For decades, prison gangs learned something faster than the state did. Paper trails kill careers. Paper trails kill empires. Paper trails get intercepted. So the most important decisions, the ones that shaped life and death, were made without writing a single word. Hits were ordered by tap code, body language, short phrases, eye contact, a nod, a hand gesture, placement on the yard. Some of the most violent events in California prison history were triggered through signals so subtle that guards watching cameras didn't understand what they saw. One IGI officer described it like this: by the time you notice something's wrong, the blood is already on the floor. The green light, California's most feared invisible order. One of the most powerful tools used by prison gangs is the green light, an order authorizing violence on individuals, entire street gangs, rival factions, former members, debtors, informants. A green light can be system-wide, prison-wide, yard-specific, temporary, permanent. Some groups, like Laim, have greenlit entire neighborhoods for violating politics. These orders often come with no written record, yet within hours, hundreds of inmates across multiple prisons know exactly who is marked. This is one of the clearest examples of ghost operations. A lethal command that moves through the system like electricity without ever appearing on paper. The kites that never get found. Not all communication is verbal. Some of the most dangerous kites, gang messages, are the ones investigators never recover. These kites are micro-written on rice paper, hidden in toothpaste tubes, wrapped in plastic and swallowed, sewn into clothing seams, embedded in artwork, smuggled through compromised staff, buried under rec yard gravel, tucked behind light fixtures, passed during medical trips, hidden inside religious materials. Every intercepted kite is a victory for investigators. Every intercepted kite is also a reminder that 10 more got through. Ghost Operations Case Study: the 2006 Nanofarads Internal Purge. In 2006, multiple NF indictment documents referenced a purge, a series of internal executions targeting members who violated codes or challenged leadership. The purge included multiple planned killings, coordinated orders across several prisons, silent approvals from the SHU, targeting of high-ranking defectors, street-level enforcement. Most of these murders never made headlines. Some weren't even publicized by CDCR. But the aftershocks reshaped the NF hierarchy for years. The EAM blacklist, a death ledger without ink. The Mexican Mafia has maintained forms of bad lists for decades. These lists include debtors, dropouts, rivals, disrespectful members, inmates who assault serenos, anyone refusing to follow EAM orders. But here's the catch. These lists rarely exist physically. They live in the memories of lieutenants, enforcers, and trusted soldiers. One former EAM associate testified that he memorized over 60 names by heart. No notes, no writing, nothing to seize. This is one of the purest examples of a ghost operation. A death ledger that cannot be confiscated. Aryan Brotherhood silent wars. The battles no one talks about. The AB has been involved in some of the most violent internal conflicts in U.S. prison history, but many of their wars never appear in news reports. Examples documented in sealed testimony include quiet purges of suspected informants, contract killings avoided by reassigning targets, debt-related internal hits, elimination of weak links, targeting members who cooperated with Laim too closely, disputes over federal versus state AB representation. Many murders were staged to look like drug overdoses, accidents, suicide attempts, random inmate fights. These staged events are some of the most chilling ghost operations known in the system. Violence disguised as coincidence. BGF's invisible influence, political power without noise. BGF doesn't rely on widespread violence. They rely on strategic, surgical moves. Their ghost operations include silent recruitment, political indoctrination, high-level planning sessions in code, protecting African American inmates through influence rather than force, supporting outside organizations linked to their ideology, While other gangs flex through violence, BGF flexes through structure and secrecy. Their quietness is their power. The silent yard phenomenon, when everyone knows no one speaks. Sometimes the most dangerous moment in a California prison is the quiet before an approved attack. Corrections officers describe scenarios where inmates suddenly separate, conversations stop, movement freezes, attention fills the air. Veteran COs know that silence is a warning. Ghost operations thrive in silence. Because while riots are loud, political killings are whisper quiet. The unreported murders, deaths without signatures. Not every inmate death is classified as gang-related. Some are rule violations. Some are political crimes. Some are revenge hits. Some are internal purges. But many are labeled inmate-on-inmate assault, unclassified homicide, administrative segregation death, unresolved, under investigation. These are ghost operations. Their motives are known by the inmates and unknown to the public. The ghost courts, how gangs conduct trials in silence. Prison gangs hold their own trials. These trials determine discipline, membership status, execution orders, internal disputes, leadership changes. Trials are held through cuts, committee meetings, yard conversations, legal mail, coded phone calls. Some of the harshest punishments in California prison history came from ghost courts, decisions rendered and enforced without any official record. Why ghost operations exist? Ghost operations aren't just strategic, they're necessary. Because gangs know. The SHU isolates leaders. IGI monitors mail. Phones get confiscated. Visits get recorded. Yard cameras catch movements. Undercover agents infiltrate ranks. Informants exist everywhere. So the only way to survive is to operate in shadows. To make decisions without evidence. To rule without writing. To kill without noise. To control without being seen. This invisible world is where California's real prison politics happen. Inside these walls, power isn't measured in muscles or tattoos. It's measured in silence, in loyalty, in decisions made in the dark. California didn't just build prisons. It built kingdoms. Empires without sunlight. Leaders without freedom. Wars without headlines. And the truth is simple. As long as people go in. As long as gangs hold the keys. As long as the politics stay alive. These stories will never end. If you want to go deeper into this world, the untold riots, the legendary shot callers, the secret deals and deadly betrayals, then hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us as we uncover the shadows most people will never see. This is Behind Bars TV. And these are the stories California can't bury.